Ascendai, The Destiny Crest. Audiobook by Robinson and Walsh. Chapter 8, Special Bond. Colt approached the front of the cabin and stopped abruptly as he saw the front of it. Snow was piled high on every side of the small structure, but the front door looked like it had been dug out recently and had only a thick layer of newly fallen snow in front of it. "Somebody's been here," he said, looking around suspiciously. "Looks like it's been a while, though." He walked closer, then kneeled and began clearing snow away from the door. Colt looked up in amazement as the wolf came up and started digging with him. The animal's massive paw sent snow flying out behind him. "Cool," Colt said with a laugh as he bent back down to help. The area was quickly cleaned, and Colt carefully inspected the door. The lock is broken." He slowly pushed the door open and peeked inside. "Anybody here?" He stepped through the door with the wolf following closely behind him. The small kitchen and adjoining living room were the only rooms left intact. The kitchen was completely bare. The small table where his family had eaten their last meal together was gone, and most of the cabinets were missing doors. The couch and recliner were still there in the living room, but they had been moved close to the massive fireplace. The hallway that led to the destroyed part of the cabin was completely sealed off. It looked like someone had taken scraps of wood from the destroyed section of the cabin to block the doorway. There were piles of trash scattered around the rooms, and he saw some of the missing cabinet doors stacked by the fireplace. Someone stayed here a while. They must have been using those for firewood. "Pretty smart," Colt said as he headed into the kitchen. "Last time I was here, these cabinets were full." He searched everywhere, hoping to find something that he could use, but the entire kitchen had been cleaned out. "Well, the place looks sturdy enough, and that fireplace will sure come in handy at night. I think we should stay here a while. We should have a lot better chance of not getting caught if we stay out here. Come on, boy, let's go outside and look around." They spent the rest of the day exploring the area around the cabin and collecting firewood. That night, he and the wolf huddled in front of the large fire. The cheerful blaze gave a homey sense to the small room. After Colt had eaten some dinner, he stretched out on the couch with the wolf lying on the floor beside him. "Good night, boy," he said, stroking the wolf's soft fur. Then he drifted off to sleep. As Colt slept, he dreamt of a beautiful woman in a long ball gown, escorted by a tall, handsome man, walking out of a cheerfully lit building. Their clothes were from a different time, and the cobblestone street was lit with old-fashioned street lamps. Horse-drawn carriages wheeled past them as they walked through the night, laughing and talking quietly. They reached a corner and turned down a darkened side street. They had only gone a couple of feet before a sinister figure materialized in front of them and cut them off. He was fully dressed in black, and his head was covered with a dark hood that obscured his face. The couple stopped abruptly, and the woman let out a small shriek of surprise as she grabbed her escort's arm in fear. The man patted her arm reassuringly. "Excuse us, sir." The cloaked figure didn't respond or make any move, gesturing that he would allow the couple to pass. The man pushed his shoulders back, took a step towards the dark figure, and said loudly, "Stand aside, please. Let us pass." The cloaked man raised his head a fraction, and the couple could see a red glow emanating from the creature's eyes as he glared at them from underneath the deep hood. They were both filled with horror. The man stepped back, the young woman clinging tightly to his arm. "What do you want?" the young man asked, standing his ground despite his growing fear. The cloaked man breathed in deeply, enjoying the scent of the young woman, and an eerie voice issued from him. "Ah, beautiful. And 21. My favorite year." How did he know her age? The man cast a surprised look at the woman cowering next to him, and then quickly pushed her behind him. He sprang towards the cloaked man, yelling, "Never!" his arms outstretched to grab him. The cloaked man contemptuously grabbed him by the throat and heaved him against the wall. There was a sickening thud as the man hit the brick wall and then slid down into a heap on the ground and was still. The man stared in horror at the cloaked form and opened her mouth to scream. In the blink of an eye, the sinister figure was on top of her, knocking her to the ground and covering her mouth with his hand to stop her scream. Her head slammed into the ground as she fell, and blood started trickling onto the ground from a cut on the back of her head. She struggled weakly, but to no avail. The cloaked man's hood had fallen off when he jumped forward, revealing a pale, handsome face. Dead, glowing eyes stared at the frantic woman, and thin lips pulled back from white teeth as he gave her a seductive smile. "Relax," he breathed. The woman stilled immediately, staring into his eyes as though hypnotized. He uncovered her mouth and breathed in deeply, savoring her scent. Then he rolled his hand around, gathering her hair up tightly into his fist, and slowly tilted her head back, exposing her throat. He stared hungrily at the pulse beating frantically beneath the fragile skin. He opened his mouth, baring razor-sharp teeth, and leaned in to bite. He was interrupted by a loud roar that shook the ground underneath him. With a snarl of frustration, he looked behind him and saw the savage, glowing eyes of a huge black wolf. It was crouched, ready to spring, its fur bristling and huge white teeth bared as a low growl came from its throat. The vampire's frustration turned to instant fear as he saw the wolf. "Not you," he hissed, and instantly leapt up to the rooftop far above him. He looked back to see if the wolf had followed him, then turned, intending to put more distance between himself and the huge animal, and met the black eyes of a young Indian man. The Indian's face was almost completely covered in war paint, giving him a fierce, wild look. He had a muscular, lean body and held a wicked-looking tomahawk in each hand. The Indian swung one of the tomahawks and struck the vampire in the neck, causing a deep wound. The force of the blow knocked the vampire from the rooftop. His arms and legs windmilled as he searched futilely for something to grab. The wolf leapt from the ground below, catching the vampire mid-fall, and removed the vampire's head in one vicious bite of his huge jaws. The Indian easily jumped down from the rooftop and landed next to the huge animal. "Good, Tama," he said as he put his hand on the animal's head. The woman was sitting up on the ground with her hands wrapped around her knees, shaking in shock and fear as she stared at the approaching pair. The Indian leaned down and examined her neck closely. "She's clean. We can let this one live." Colt woke in the darkness of the small cabin, breathing heavily. The dream had filled him with fierce exhilaration. The wolf at his feet looked up at him, his eyes glowing eerily like the wolf in his dream. "What is up with these crazy dreams? I hope I'm not supposed to be hunting vampires. What am I thinking? There's no such thing as vampires. I've got to stop eating right before I go to sleep." He reached out and touched the wolf. His body relaxed as his hand ran through the soft fur. "I had a dream about a wolf that is even bigger than you. Its name was Tama. Weird, huh? I need to give you a name. Something powerful." A huge yawn interrupted him. "I'll think of one first thing in the morning," he said as he rolled over on the small couch, closed his eyes, and almost immediately fell back to sleep. 4 months had passed since Colt had started living on the mountain with a huge white wolf he had named Samson. It hadn't taken him long to realize that he and the wolf's special bond allowed them to feel each other's emotions. It had also heightened Colt's senses, and his strength and speed had increased incredibly. Through their time together, he and the wolf had settled into comfortable daily routine. Almost every morning they would hunt for food. Colt's tracking and hunting skills had greatly improved since bonding with Samson. Since the mountain had been closed to people, wildlife had begun to move back into the area. The wolf led Colt to the best places to find prey and demonstrated the patience it took to wait for the right moment to strike. Samson made all of the kills. His amazing speed never failed to bring down whatever they hunted. They spent each afternoon searching the mountain for any sign of his sisters. The search hadn't yielded any sign of the missing girls, but Colt was having the time of his life. He had always loved the outdoors, but almost lost that love when he had nearly starved to death while living in the cave. The pair awoke before dawn and headed towards the far side of the lake to the location of one of their most productive game trails. "Let's set up over here, Samson," Colt said, as they crouched down almost 50 yards from the trail. They waited patiently as the sun, reflecting off the lake behind them, began to rise over the mountain. It was the coldest time of the morning, but the cold didn't bother Colt anymore. Since his connection with the wolf, he no longer needed to wear his coat. It was as if he had an internal heater. They laid flat on the ground, watching the trail intently, excited about the hunt ahead. Minutes later, the light wind hit them in the face, bringing with it a scent that Colt had never smelled before. He could feel Samson's excitement jump as he too smelled the approaching animal. "I wonder what it is," Colt thought, feeling his excitement rise in response to the wolf's. "Maybe it's his favorite food." They waited as the scent grew stronger, and Colt knew that their prey was drawing closer and closer. Fear conflicted with his excitement as a huge bear stepped out from behind some brush and onto the trail, then headed right for them. He knew the fear came from him, and that the excitement had to be generated from the wolf. Samson, sensing Colt's fear, nudged him with his paw, instantly calming him. "Samson, you cannot take on a bear," Colt started. But before he could get the words from his mouth, the wolf sprang into action. Colt's heart pounded in his chest as the bear started to stand upright in an attempt to intimidate the wolf that was rapidly closing the distance between them. To Colt, the bear appeared to be almost 7 feet tall. Before the bear was totally erect, the divine wolf leapt towards him and knocked the beast onto his back before springing off. Colt watched in awe as Samson moved back to the enraged beast's side as it struggled back to its feet. Then the wolf bit into the back of the bear's neck, holding tightly with its strong jaws. Razor-sharp teeth tore through the bear's skin as it thrashed violently, trying to escape. With one quick yank of the wolf's head and a squeeze from the powerful jaws, it was over. Colt heard the bear's neck break from where he stood, and the massive beast lay still on the ground. Even without the break, the bear was still doomed, as Samson's sharp teeth had nearly torn its head from its body. Disgusting! Why the head every time? Colt stood staring in disbelief at what he had just witnessed. He had seen the wolf tear apart much smaller animals they had hunted, but had never thought much of it. But this was different. Samson had just torn apart a full-grown bear like it was nothing, and he didn't even have a scratch on him. Am I supposed to be some kind of divine hunter? You're the hunter. I'm more like a divine spectator. He snickered to himself, or actually just a spectator. Colt walked up to the fresh kill, staring at Samson, shocked as he saw the size of the bear up close. The wolf stepped back submissively from the kill as Colt approached. Colt took his knife out and carved away a couple of large pieces of meat from the animal's hindquarters. When he was done, the wolf came up and ate. After a few minutes, there was hardly anything left of the once mighty bear. They headed back to the cabin so Colt could prepare his meal, stopping briefly near a frozen area of the lake, which Colt used as a makeshift freezer. He poked a fresh hole in the ice, tying one end of a rope around a chunk of the meat, and the other end to a large, sturdy stick he could wedge on the outside of the hole. When he wanted to retrieve the meat, he could simply pull it up using the rope. He dropped the meat into the hole and then packed snow firmly over the entrance to seal it. This should hold me for a few days. After completing the task, he walked to the cabin and cooked the rest of the meat. After breakfast, they headed out and continued searching around the area where he had last seen his family. They had searched the area many times before, but Colt was determined to check every inch of the mountain. It was early in the afternoon when Colt decided it was time to head back to camp. They had been searching hard, and with the excitement of the morning, Colt wanted to rest. A little break is just what we need, he thought. They raced through the woods together, headed back towards the cabin. Samson bolted out ahead as usual, and Colt accelerated in pursuit. Colt's strength and speed had continued to grow each day he was with the wolf, but he had never been able to catch him. As he pursued the wolf through the woods, Colt pushed himself faster and faster, and slowly began to gain on him. The wolf finally came within reach, and Colt pounced on him, knocking him to the ground as they wrestled playfully. "I'm getting faster, pal," Colt said as they lay on the ground, breathing heavily from their exertions. Several minutes later they stood and began walking together back towards the cabin. Colt rested his hand on Samson's back as they walked. As they neared the cabin, Colt noticed that the snow on the roof had completely thawed, and the sun was reflecting brightly from something on top of it. Wonder what that is. Come on, Samson, let's check it out." He walked up to the side of the cabin and jumped up, catching the roof's edge and pulling himself up, then walked over to examine the tiny object. He thought his heart was going to stop when he realized what he had found. Right there in front of him was a tiny, purple, heart-shaped earring. He picked it up in disbelief and examined it closely. He felt hope and joy building up inside him as he remembered what his mother had said when he first met his sisters. "I have a hard time telling them apart myself sometimes. That's why Candy has pink earrings, and Sandy wears purple." It was Sandy's earring! All the hope that he had had that his sisters may have survived, and all the searching he had done had not been in vain. "I wonder how it got on the roof," he thought. He jumped down from the roof so excited about the possibility that his sister could be alive, he could barely stand still. He jumped around the small clearing in front of the cabin, his yells of excitement echoing off the hillsides around him. "Look, Samson," he said breathlessly, holding out the small piece of jewelry. "My sister is alive. She's alive. Tomorrow we need to search harder. We need to find her." Later that night, Colt was sitting in the recliner in front of the fireplace, staring at Sandy's earring. He was trying to come up with an intelligent answer for how it could have gotten on the roof. All of a sudden, Samson lifted his head from where he lay at Colt's feet and stared alertly at the door. Colt felt waves of excitement emanating from the wolf that was more intense than any he had ever felt from him. Before Colt could speak, Samson exploded out of the door of the cabin and vanished into the night. Colt jumped up and quickly ran outside, trying to see where he had gone. "Samson! Where are you going?" he called out loudly. He had never seen the wolf act this way. Since their connection, they had never been out of each other's sight. Now as Colt stood in the light spilling from the cabin door, he was aware of a feeling of emptiness growing inside him, and knew that the wolf must be getting further and further away. His panic was growing almost as fast as the emptiness. He knew that the wolf made him feel whole, but he had never realized how badly he needed Samson to be near. Colt stuffed Sandy's earring into his pocket and ran out into the darkness, yelling, "Samson! Samson, where are you? Samson, come back! Samson!"